There's a moment early in the making of Normal that almost sounds like a dare. Director Ben Wheatley looked at a modern action film, one involving guns, explosions, snowstorms, and escalating chaos, and decided something radical. Almost everything needed to be real. Real snow, real impacts, real danger, no safety net of glossy CGI. In an era where digital effects can solve nearly any problem, this film deliberately chose the harder road, grounding itself in physical reality to capture something raw, dusty, and unpredictable. And that single decision quietly shaped everything you're about to see on screen. Today, we're diving deep into Normal, from the casting secrets to the production challenges you may have missed. Stick around because you're about to see this movie like never before. And before we get into the weeds, if you enjoy deep dive breakdowns like this one, take a second to like the video, subscribe to Cinemagna, and drop a comment below telling me whether you prefer your action films slick and polished or rough around the edges. At first glance, Normal presents itself as a familiar setup, a small American town, a new sheriff with a past he'd rather forget, a sense of calm that feels just a little too quiet. But beneath that surface is a film that resists easy labels. It's an action movie that refuses to sprint right out of the gate, a contemporary Western that looks backward and forward at the same time, a mystery that slowly reveals itself before detonating into something far more dangerous. And all of it centers on one man, Sheriff Ulysses. Ulysses is played by Bob Odenkirk, continuing his unlikely but now well-earned second life as a modern action star. After redefining himself physically and psychologically in Nobody, Odenkirk wanted something adjacent but not repetitive, something that allowed him to carry bruises not just on his body, but on his soul. Ulysses isn't a power fantasy. He's a man worn down by moral injuries, failed relationships, and the creeping realization that doing the right thing doesn't always make things better. The story follows Ulysses as he's assigned to the town of Normal, an interim posting meant to be quiet, temporary, and unremarkable. The kind of place that's supposed to give him breathing room. But when a botched bank robbery rattles the town, it exposes a hidden network of secrets that suggests Normal is anything but. What begins as a low-key law enforcement problem slowly mutates into something far more volatile, forcing Ulysses to confront not just the town's darkness, but his own. Behind the camera, the creative engine driving Normal is built around a collaboration that had already proven its power. Writer 𝗗𝗜𝗏𝗧, the mind behind the John Wick franchise and Nobody, returned alongside producer 𝗗𝗏𝗏𝗧 and Odenkirk himself. But Normal didn't begin as a screenplay. It began as an idea, an 11-page document 𝗗𝗏𝗏 brought to Odenkirk and 𝗗𝗏𝗏𝗏 while they were still deep in the trenches of Nobody. Back then, the project had a different name, The Interim. The premise was deceptively simple. A beaten-down sheriff is dispatched by a fictional federal agency to towns too small to sustain their own law enforcement. He arrives, cleans things up, and moves on. Almost like a wandering gunslinger for the modern age. The idea evoked 1950s Americana, optimistic on the surface, deeply compromised underneath. And while the concept stuck with them, it took time to find the right voice. At one point, they even brought in another writer to expand the story, but something wasn't clicking. Eventually, the decision was made to let 𝗗𝗏𝗏𝗏 handle it himself. When his first draft arrived, the reaction was immediate. This wasn't just good, it was special. The kind of script that feels fully formed from page one. Odenkirk recognized right away that Normal wasn't chasing spectacle. It was inviting the audience into a mood, a place, and a slow burn that would reward patience. 𝗗𝗏𝗏𝗏 structured the screenplay intentionally. The opening is restrained, even quiet. The tension simmers instead of explodes. He wanted the audience to lean forward, to settle into the rhythms of this town and its people. Because once the film hits its turning point, what he called the moment the story hits black powder, it doesn't slow down again until the very end. The pacing snaps from measured to relentless, transforming the film almost without the viewer realizing it. Choosing the right director was critical. The producers weren't looking for someone who would overwhelm the material with style. They wanted intimacy, precision, someone who understood how character decisions could shape action rather than the other way around. That's when Ben Wheatley entered the picture. After watching Free Fire, 𝗗𝗧𝗧 saw exactly what they needed. A filmmaker who could make every bullet count, every hit feel specific, and every action beat feel motivated by character rather than choreography. For Wheatley, Normal clicked immediately. He described it as an inverted high noon, a Western where the sheriff isn't rallying the town against outsiders, but slowly realizing the town itself may be the enemy. That inversion excited him. So did the opportunity to finally make a Western, albeit one filtered through modern anxieties and moral ambiguity. From the very first creative meetings, Wheatley, 𝗗𝗧, Odenkirk, and 𝗗𝗧𝗧 aligned on one guiding principle: ground everything. That philosophy shaped every department. The action would be in camera whenever possible. The camera approach would be classical, favoring moving masters and a single camera setup. Wheatley wanted the film to feel like an old Hollywood Western, but captured with modern tools. He reunited with cinematographer Armando Salas, with whom he'd already developed a shorthand built on careful planning, storyboards, and deliberate compositions. Salas brought a deeply personal visual sensibility to the project. Having grown up fascinated by Super 8 film and later earning recognition from the American Society of Cinematographers, he approached Normal as a study in atmosphere, the wide flatness of the landscapes, the oppressive emptiness of small towns, the way snow, dust, and smoke could obscure moral clarity just as easily as visual information. Together, Wheatley and Salas designed a look that could shift seamlessly from quiet tension to violent chaos without feeling inconsistent. Casting the town itself was just as important as casting the lead. Alongside Odenkirk, the film brought in Henry Winkler and Lena Headey, two performers Wheatley immediately trusted. He later admitted that with actors of that caliber, the usual director's anxiety about finding the performance on set simply vanished. They arrived prepared, precise, and fully formed, allowing the camera to capture nuance rather than manufacture it. The supporting cast leaned heavily on Canadian talent, grounding the town of Normal in faces that felt authentic rather than overly familiar. These weren't characters designed to announce themselves. They blended in, which made their eventual revelations all the more unsettling. Every casting choice reinforced the film's core idea: danger doesn't always look dangerous. Production eventually settled in Winnipeg, a location the producers already trusted from their experience on Nobody. The region offered not just tax incentives and experienced crews, but landscapes that felt cinematically inevitable. Flat plains stretching to the horizon, towns with a single stoplight, places where time seems to slow down. For Wheatley, driving through Manitoba for the first time felt like discovering the visual DNA of his film. But as carefully as everything had been planned, Normal was about to collide with one of filmmaking's oldest enemies: the weather. Or more accurately, the absence of it. And that's where things start to get complicated. By the time principal photography wrapped, everyone involved knew they had something potent, but also something delicate. Normal was never designed to be assembled mechanically. It wasn't a film you could just cut together quickly and trust momentum to do the rest. The real shape of the movie would be found in post-production, where tone, rhythm, and restraint would matter just as much as plot. Editing began with a clear mandate from Ben Wheatley: resist the urge to speed things up. In early cuts, there was a temptation to trim silence, tighten pauses, and smooth over moments of discomfort. But every time the film leaned too far in that direction, it started to lose what made it unique. The unease faded, the town became less oppressive, Ulysses felt less trapped. Wheatley and the editorial team quickly realized that Normal lived in the spaces between events just as much as in the events themselves. Scenes were allowed to breathe, sometimes uncomfortably so. A look held a beat longer than expected. A conversation ended without resolution. A character exited a frame and the camera stayed behind. These choices weren't accidents, they were calculated risks designed to keep the audience slightly off balance. The film wanted viewers to feel like something was wrong long before they could articulate why. Sound design played a massive role in reinforcing that tension. Instead of relying heavily on score, many sequences were built around ambient noise. Wind through empty streets, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the distant echo of machinery or passing vehicles. These sounds weren't just background, They were emotional cues, subtly amplifying the sense of isolation. When music did appear, it was used sparingly and strategically. The score avoided melodrama, favoring minimalist textures and restrained motifs. Rather than telling the audience how to feel, it hovered at the edges of scenes, sometimes barely noticeable, sometimes pressing in just enough to raise anxiety. The goal wasn't to heighten action, it was to underline inevitability. One of the most debated aspects of the edit was how much information to give the audience, and when. 𝗗𝗧 script intentionally withholds certain details, trusting viewers to piece things together. In post-production, there were moments where additional exposition was considered, lines that could clarify motivations, scenes that could explain backstory more explicitly. Ultimately, most of these ideas were discarded. The team agreed that mystery was not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be protected. The town of Normal isn't meant to be fully understood. Neither is Ulysses. The film invites interpretation rather than providing answers, and that philosophy guided every editorial decision. This restraint extended to action sequences as well. In early assemblies, some fights played longer, with additional coverage that showcased choreography and stunt work. But when those versions were screened, something felt off. The violence started to feel indulgent, so scenes were pared back. Hits landed harder because there were fewer of them. The camera lingered on aftermath instead of impact. Blood and damage were shown, but never fetishized. One particularly intense sequence went through multiple iterations. In one cut, it was fast, brutal, and undeniably exciting, but it overshadowed the character moment at its center. In the final version, the action is almost secondary. What matters is Ulysses' reaction, the realization on his face, and the moral line he knows he's crossing. The violence becomes a consequence, not a payoff. There were, inevitably, scenes that didn't survive the final cut. Some were trimmed for pacing. Others, while well executed, disrupted the film's tonal balance. A handful of character moments that leaned too far into humor were removed, not because they didn't work, but because they made the town feel too friendly, too safe. Normal needed to remain slightly inhospitable at all times. Interestingly, one of the most talked-about deleted moments involved the quieter beat, an extended scene that explored Ulysses' past more explicitly. It offered clarity, context, and emotional grounding. On paper, it was strong. In isolation, it played beautifully. But in the context of the full film, it softened the mystery too much. By explaining Ulysses, it diminished him. The decision to cut it was painful, but unanimous. As post-production progressed, test screenings provided valuable feedback, not in terms of plot comprehension, but emotional response. Viewers consistently described feeling uneasy even during calm scenes. They noted a sense of dread they couldn't quite explain. For Wheatley and 𝗗𝗧, that was confirmation they were on the right track. The film wasn't supposed to comfort, it was supposed to linger. Marketing discussions reflected this philosophy as well. There was internal debate about how to position Normal. On the surface, it stars a recognizable action lead and comes from a writer known for high-octane franchises. But selling it as a straightforward action movie would be misleading. At the same time, leaning too hard into its art house sensibilities risked alienating audiences who would genuinely connect with it. The solution was a careful balancing act. Trailers focused on mood rather than plot, shots of empty streets, fragments of dialogue, brief flashes of violence without context. The goal was to intrigue rather than explain. Posters emphasized isolation and restraint, often placing Ulysses alone within vast, empty frames. Press materials leaned into the idea of Normal as a genre subversion. Interviews highlighted the film's Western DNA, its commitment to practical effects, and its character-first approach to action. Odenkirk spoke candidly about aging, vulnerability, and the appeal of playing someone who doesn't have all the answers. Wheatley discussed trust in actors, trust in audiences, and trust in silence. As release approached, there was a growing sense that Normal wouldn't be a film everyone reacted to the same way. Some viewers would crave clearer answers, others would latch onto its ambiguity, and that was okay. In many ways, that division was part of the design. The final cut locked with a runtime that felt deliberate rather than padded. Nothing rushed, nothing overstated. When the credits rolled, the film didn't feel finished so much as complete, like a story that ended where it needed to, not where convention demanded. But the real test of normal wouldn't come from critics or box office numbers alone. It would come from whether audiences carried it with them, whether they replayed scenes in their heads, whether they questioned characters' choices long after leaving the theater. And that, ultimately, is where Normal aims to live, not in easy answers, but in lingering questions. As Normal began reaching audiences, one thing became immediately clear. This wasn't a film designed to wash over viewers and disappear. Reactions were thoughtful, sometimes divided, and often deeply personal. Some viewers fixated on the mechanics of the mystery. Others were drawn to the emotional fatigue etched into Ulysses' face. Many walked away unsettled, unable to fully articulate why, but knowing the film had gotten under their skin. That response was intentional. From the earliest drafts, Normal was conceived less as a puzzle to be solved and more as a condition to be experienced. The town isn't just a setting, it's a pressure system. It tests how long a person can exist in moral limbo before something breaks. Ulysses arrives believing he can keep his head down, do the job, and move on. What he discovers instead is that neutrality has a cost. Silence has a cost. And doing nothing can be just as destructive as doing the wrong thing. One of the most compelling aspects of the film is how it treats authority. Ulysses wears the badge, but the badge doesn't protect him. It doesn't grant clarity. If anything, it isolates him further. He's expected to maintain order in a place where order itself is compromised. The film never lets him off the hook for that contradiction. Every decision he makes closes one door while quietly opening another. The town of Normal reinforces this theme visually and narratively. It's not overtly corrupt. There are no mustache-twirling villains or grand speeches about evil. Instead, there's complacency. People who've learned how to look the other way. Systems that function just well enough to avoid scrutiny. It's a portrait of how decay often operates, not through chaos, but through routine. That's why the film's violence hits as hard as it does. When things finally erupt, it feels less like a twist and more like gravity taking over. The slow burn isn't there to tease the audience, it's there to make the explosion feel unavoidable. By the time the story reaches its most intense moments, the question isn't, will this happen? It's, how bad will it get? Bob Odenkirk's performance is central to making that journey work. Ulysses isn't charismatic in a traditional sense. He doesn't charm his way through danger. He absorbs it. His reactions are often delayed, internal, and deeply human. You see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the weighing of consequences, the regret forming even before the act is complete. It's a performance built on restraint, and it rewards close attention. The supporting characters function almost like mirrors, reflecting different ways of surviving within compromised systems. Some adapt, some rationalize, some resist in small, ultimately insufficient ways. The film never declares which path is correct. It simply observes the outcomes. That observational quality is what gives Normal its quiet power. It doesn't preach, it presents. Even the ending resists closure. There's no triumphant resolution, no sweeping statement about justice restored. What you're left with instead is a sense of aftermath. Things have changed, but not necessarily for the better. The town will go on. Ulysses will go on. But neither will be untouched by what happened. That lingering discomfort is the point. In many ways, Normal feels like a response to contemporary anxieties about institutions, about moral fatigue, about the cost of staying silent in broken systems. Yet it never anchors itself to a specific moment in time. Its Western DNA gives it a mythic quality, allowing it to comment on cycles of violence and complicity that repeat across generations. Looking back at the production as a whole, what stands out most is how unified the vision remained from start to finish. The commitment to practical filmmaking, the refusal to over-explain, the trust placed in audiences to sit with ambiguity. Every major creative decision reinforced those values. Nothing feels accidental. Nothing feels compromised. Normal may not be the loudest film of its kind, but it's one that earns its volume when it finally raises its voice. It's the kind of movie that grows in the mind after the screen goes dark. The kind you revisit, not to find answers, but to notice details you missed the first time. And in a cinematic landscape crowded with noise, that kind of restraint feels almost radical. If you made it this far, thanks for taking the journey with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the making of Normal, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Cinemagna for more behind-the-scenes breakdowns, and leave a comment below letting me know what you thought of the film, and whether its ending stuck with you as much as it did with me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.